Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's program. I welcome you on behalf of the Association of Pittsburgh Priests. It's October 5th. We're in the fall season. I hope you all love the fall season, so welcome to that. Our title this evening is Insidious Impacts of Mass Incarceration, Why They Matter Now. And our speaker will be Martha Conley, and I'll introduce her more formally after our prayer. Give us your wisdom.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation. I feel honored to be here this evening. And I've been asked to talk about mass incarceration, and I was also asked to talk about the death penalty, my work with the death penalty. The U.S. has 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners. And to put that in perspective, in 1972, there were 300,000 incarcerated prisoners in the United States. Today, there are 2.3 million people incarcerated, and even more are under supervision on parole or probation. And I think we can draw a straight line from slavery to mass incarceration. America's historical reliance on a captive labor force and racial bias have resulted in a carceral system that has spiraled out of control. The U.S. is probably the only country in the world that has slavery written into its constitution. We're taught in high school that the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. However, there's an important exception that has fueled mass incarceration in the United States. Attorney Bryant Stevenson, who is a noted civil rights lawyer in the United States, says that slavery was not abolished, it has evolved. Senator Charles Sumner was an ardent abolitionist and proposed the following language to abolish slavery back during the Civil War. His proposal was, quote, "All persons are equal before the law, so that no person can hold another as a slave, and the Congress shall have power to make all laws necessary and proper to carry this declaration into effect everywhere in the United States." Instead of Sumner's version, however, this is what we got. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Immediately after the passage of the 13th Amendment, Southern states began passing black codes targeting Blacks to convict them and thus bring them back into slavery as exceptions under the amendment. Convict leasing programs in the South allowed plantation owners to lease convicts to work on the plantations. Researchers have said that convict leasing was actually worse than slavery. Congress passed the Voting Rights Act in 1965 to protect the voting rights of African Americans. However, in 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Section 5 preclearance provision of the 1965 Voting Rights Act in Shelby County versus Holder. Those preclearance states, Texas and North Carolina, immediately began passing laws making it more difficult for certain groups, translation, Black people, to vote. Some states reduced the number of hours for voting. Some limited the number of polling places in Black areas. Some prohibited the provision of food or water to those standing on line for hours. A federal court later struck down the North Carolina law, which the court said was designed to target African Americans with almost surgical precision. The decision of the court gutting Section 5 shifted the burden from the preclearance states to show that their proposed laws were not discriminatory to the individual voter, to show that the law discriminated against them. African Americans are 12% of the population and 38% of people incarcerated. African Americans are 48% of people serving life without parole. Mass incarceration was intentional, a pushback to the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and other gains of the civil rights movement. President Bill Clinton signed the 1994 crime bill into law. The law put into place tough new criminal sentences and incentivized states to build more prisons. It didn't create mass incarceration, but it exacerbated it exponentially. The Democratic Party was trying to jump on the tough on crime bandwagon, and it worked. The worst thing that the 1994 crime bill did was to permit prosecutors to try children as adults and sentence them to adult prisons where they were brutalized, where many were brutalized. John Ehrlichman was President Nixon's domestic policy advisor. He was interviewed by Harper's Magazine, and this quote surfaced after his death. Quote, "The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and Black people. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or Black, but by getting the public to associate hippies with marijuana, and Blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing them both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." Nixon declared the war on drugs before there was a drug problem. And it's rumored that the CIA was involved in creating the drug problem by dumping drugs into Compton, California, which then spread across the country and destroyed 2 generations of Blacks. It's ironic that while crack cocaine devastated the Black community, the victims of the drug war were harshly punished through mass incarceration. There is a dispute about the involvement of the CIA on creating the drug problem in the United States. However, there's no dispute about the devastating impact of crack on the Black community, which resulted in the deaths of thousands of, the imprisonment of hundreds of thousands, and the advent of children whose parents had died or were imprisoned because of drugs. While the reaction to the war on drugs could have been indifferent, the government chose incarceration over rehabilitation, and mass incarceration was born. Most prisons in Pennsylvania are located in rural areas and provide jobs to local citizens. The numbers of prisoners are used to justify congressional representation in those areas. In other words, there are several congressional districts that would not exist but for the prison populations in those areas. Prisoners are supposed to be counted in the areas where they come from. Thus, this practice reduces the representation in urban areas from whence most state prisoners come. Prisoners in PA cannot vote. The F word, felon, is the new N word. In some communities, more than half of Black men are unable to vote because of felony disenfranchisement laws. Michelle Alexander points out in her book, The New Jim Crow, that once labeled a felon, people were subject to some of the same discrimination that Blacks were subject to under Jim Crow. Millions of African Americans have been disenfranchised by the war on drugs. And as I said, currently there are 2.3 million people in prison in the United States, locked in cages. The majority are going to get out someday. And when they get out, they will find that the label felon has stripped them of many rights that they had before they went to prison. Pennsylvania hit its peak in prison population in 2009. at 50,312. Pennsylvania spent over $2 billion on corrections in 2013. At the same time, crime in the state dropped by 29%, and the national crime rate was cut in half. Today, the prison population stands at 37,303 inmates, male and female. According to the Brennan Justice Center, about 39% of the U.S. prison population are unnecessarily behind bars. That amounts to 576,000 prisoners. 25% of those are nonviolent drug offenders who would be better served by alternatives to incarceration, such as medical treatment, community service, or probation. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, spending on prisoners varies widely across the U.S. Mississippi, for example, spends $18,000 per year on prisoners, while Wyoming spends $139,978 per prisoner, and the nationwide average is $45,771 per prisoner per year. According to the website howmuch.net, Pennsylvania inmates are costing taxpayers $42,700 per year. John Ehrlichman was President Nixon's domestic policy advisor. The Vietnam War was extremely unpopular because of the draft, which was taking not only young black men, but young white men to war. I recall that a lot of the white guys in my law school class were there to avoid the draft. A lot of draft eligible men were going to Canada to avoid the draft. And there were a lot of protests and a lot of uproar about the war. Those of you old enough to remember the Vietnam War years will remember that many demonstrations against the war, and in particular the draft, keep in mind that the COINTELPRO program operated in 1956 to 1971, and many of their tactics are still being used today. COINTELPRO was used to disrupt groups like the Black Panther Party that the FBI deemed the, quote, the greatest threat to internal security of the country. The FBI had earlier targeted Martin Luther King Jr. and encouraged him to commit suicide. From emancipation down to the present day, Blacks have been labeled criminals by the powers that be, from the Black codes to the justification for lynchings, to the bombing of Black Wall Street in Oklahoma, to the bombing of Osage Avenue in Philadelphia in 1985, to the Black Panthers, to the Black Lives Matter movement. It seems that whenever a group appears, suddenly it's labeled criminal. I should talk about ALEC. ALEC is the American Legislative Exchange Council. It's a corporate lobbying group that brings together corporate lobbyists and politicians to draft and vote behind closed doors on model bills that often benefit the corporation's bottom lines, and then are introduced in state legislatures across the country. We have ALEC to thank for a lot of controversial legislation, including stand your ground laws and the 1994 crime bill. Governor Ridge was a member of ALEC in 1994, and Pennsylvania, he was governor of Pennsylvania at the time, and Pennsylvania was actually used as a test case for the 1994 crime bill. There are many factors leading to mass incarceration. Here's the list: Richard Nixon and the war on drugs, the decision to criminalize drug use, the 1994 crime bill, ALEC, the CIA's alleged dumping of drugs in Compton, California, and money. A lot of individuals and corporations are making a lot of money from locking people in cages. Food service, medical services, phone calls, tablets, commissary. These are all examples of corporations who provide services to the prison industry, and they make a lot of money doing it. A lot of corporations are using prison labor to produce goods and services. Some examples are Victoria's Secret, Walmart, Starbucks, McDonald's, Fidelity Investments, JCPenney, Sprint call centers, American Airlines, Avis Rentals, and Whole Foods. Whole Foods, and some of these companies have backed away from using prison labor, or have said that they have backed away from using prison labor. Whole Foods, for example, was using prison labor to tend fish farms, and they have since indicated that they are not doing that anymore. We don't know if that's true or not. We should keep in mind that the majority of the people that we imprison are eventually going to be released. So we put nonviolent offenders in with violent offenders and expect them to remain nonviolent when they get out. We provide a school for criminality, essentially. Many state prisons rely on the incarcerated to provide prison services such as laundry, food service, and landscaping. Inmates are generally paid little, and depending on the state, nothing for such labor. I have a client in Pennsylvania who makes 18 cents an hour for working in the prison kitchen. In Alabama, some prisoners are not paid anything. In Florida, the state leases inmates to work, but the state gets their pay rather than the inmate. Out of these wages, the inmate often has to pay for medical, certainly in Pennsylvania, medical visits, which are $5 in Pennsylvania, phone calls, and commissary. Some states also require inmates to pay the state for room and board. And some inmates who don't have the money can't afford to go to get medical services. The 10 largest police departments in the United States have paid out over $1 billion in the 6 years between 2010 and 2015 for police misconduct, including excessive force and wrongful convictions. The money would have been better spent on public education or public mental health to undo some of the damage done by mass incarceration. Public and political pressure to effectively fight crime and improve public safety has been used to justify incarceration, despite the economic and human toll. In essence, adding more and more people to prison is no longer producing the expected crime control. As state budgets grow tighter, government should invest in policies that achieve their intended goals, prioritizing modern evidence-based criminal justice policies with record of success over costly and ineffective over-incarceration seems to be the best way forward in Pennsylvania and nationwide. I was also asked to talk about my experience with the death penalty in Pennsylvania. I co-chair Pennsylvanians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty here in Pittsburgh, along with Marshall Diane, who is a federal defender here. And back in 1999, I was volunteering for the local NAACP on their legal redress committee, and we were approached by Marcus Rediker from the University of Pittsburgh History Department to put on a forum on the death penalty. And I knew nothing about the death penalty. I was working for a corporation at the time. But my co-chair of the Legal Redress Committee was Lisa Freeland, who was a federal defender. She's now the federal defender in Pittsburgh. And she knew all about the death penalty. So we took on the challenge, and we had Hurricane Carter as our keynote speaker. He had a visit with Mumia Abu Jamal, who is a political prisoner. At the time, he was at SCI Greens, the state correctional institution at Greene County, which is about an hour from Pittsburgh. And so we built the forum around his visit. And he came in after visiting with Mumia and was our keynote at the end of the day. As a result of that, I was invited down to meet Mumia, and that's how I became involved in advocating against the death penalty. When I got there, Mumia and his next door neighbor pointed out all the innocent people who were on death row. And that was an eye opener for me, because I thought, innocent on death row? And, I knew that Hurricane Carter had been exonerated. But I thought, well, that was an aberration. But indeed, they pointed out all these people, and I started visiting. I visited Walter O'Grod. I visited Jimmy Dennis. I visited Anthony Fletcher, Andre Gay, Jose Pagan, and the person that I'm representing right now, Jerome Coffey. Walter O'Grod was exonerated and released 2 years ago. Jimmy Dennis was released 2 years ago. Andre Gay is out. Anthony Fletcher is out. And so I'm just now working on getting my client, Jerome Coffey, out. And I have a co-counsel in Philadelphia, the Abolitionist Law Center, who is working on the case with me. I was surprised to learn about the statistics of the death penalty. There were 98 people executed in 1998. And because of, I think because of the fact that there's so many innocent people being found on death row, I think that the use of the death penalty has declined. And also the fact that there's so much, the representation has been really abysmal up until very recently, and now there are in fact the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania doesn't provide any money on a statewide basis for indigent defense, and but recently there have been some nonprofits who are stepping in and representing people who are on death row. So we found that the numbers have dwindled. In 2023, there were only 19 executions as compared to the 98 back in 1998. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to entertain them.
Once again, if you place it in the chat, or if you the reaction, if you raise your hand, we'll call upon you. And maybe I can start. Martha, could you shed some light of, now that we're aware of the situation, what can we do to be good advocates and not just know the information, but do something about it?
Well, I think one of the things we have to do is convince our legislators that their constituents are interested in these issues, and that that we are looking for some movement on them, and that mass incarceration is unnecessary, it's expensive, it's cruel, and it really should be eliminated. Certainly there's a place for incarceration. There are certain people that need to be kept from the rest of us, but the powers that be have gone overboard, and I think it's really a means of social control of African American men in particular. With the advent of AI, work has gone away for a lot of people, and it's so many children have been left without fathers, and women are left to raise kids by themselves without a husband or a father, and it's going to be very difficult for our society to deal with the aftermath of mass incarceration. It's going to be very difficult, because so many people, young, people have grown up without the influence of a father, and it's going to be very difficult. But I think, to answer your question, we have to become advocates in the sense of working with our representatives, and especially in the Commonwealth's legislature, because it's very difficult with the lack of balance of power here in Pennsylvania.
Thanks, Martha. I'm going to call on Joyce and Michael, but also I would encourage, if any of you also have questions about the present situation in our Allegheny County Jail, or so forth and so on. There's some of us that could assist you in answering some of those questions as well. So Joyce, Michael.
Okay. This is Michael Drohan speaking. First, I wanted to thank you, Martha, for this wonderful explanation of the situation of mass and the obscenity of mass incarceration in the state of Pennsylvania and in the country. And my question is about the particular case of Mumia Abu Jamal. What is the situation at the moment, and what are the prospects for his being released from prison?
I am not. Unfortunately, I'm not that optimistic. He was finally released from death row, but he's serving a life sentence right now at SCI Mahanoy in eastern Pennsylvania. Recently, when Larry Krasner came into office, he found several boxes in a storage room with Mumia's name on them. And in one of the boxes, there was a note from one of their star witnesses at the trial, the cab driver, Schobert, asking where his money was. So, they went back into court and suggested that, given this note from one of their star witnesses, that Mumia should have a new trial. However, the judge disagreed and denied their motion for a new trial. So he's on life row. There's recently, last weekend, there at Brown University, there was a wonderful panel about mass incarceration, as a matter of fact. And Mumia had actually written an opera, and that was performed at this forum, and it apparently is very well received. A friend of mine actually taught Mumia. She had a paper keyboard, and she taught Mumia how to play the piano and how to sing. And one day, Bariki and I were visiting with him, and Bariki and I had a little disagreement. And so, in order to break that up, Mumia started to sing, and we looked at each other. we were shocked. He has a beautiful baritone voice. And it was just a wonderful moment. And so, as a result of that, my friend Bariki started teaching him how to play the piano on this paper keyboard. And eventually, he was able to, the prison finally let him get a real keyboard. And he has written this opera, which he's never heard. But it was very well received. So that's where we are. I don't know if there are any other legal avenues for him to be released. We were very disappointed that he was not granted a new trial, given all the problems with his conviction. You know, it's very sad that our criminal justice system is like this. The Fraternal Order of Police is very invested in keeping him in prison until he dies. So
we had Joyce and Michael asking whether any states are making progress to lessen mass incarceration, that Pennsylvania could learn from.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's not showing up for me. Do you know of that, Martha, at all?
I believe so. It appears that there are some efforts. For example, in Pennsylvania, we have gone from, what was it, 50,000 down to 30 something, 37. So there are some efforts being made to reduce the numbers on death row or on the incarcerated, but I can't think of any specific examples right now.
Okay. Gretchen, your question about Alex.
Yeah, I just am not familiar with Alec that you mentioned, and I suspect maybe there are a few others on the call who also aren't. So was hoping that you might share a little bit more information.
Yeah, Alec. And I would recommend there's a film on Netflix called 13th, which talks about the 13th Amendment. And ALEC is the American Legislative Exchange Council, and what it does, it's a right-leaning organization, and they provide legislation to Republicans all over the country, and they've been around for quite a while. And as I said, we can thank them for the Stand Your Ground laws, which have killed a lot of people. But a lot of corporations it's a member organization, and corporations belong to it. And then they will develop legislation that will benefit their corporation and give it to ALEC, and then ALEC will distribute it all over, wherever it might be helpful. But recently, because ALEC was pretty much exposed, a lot of companies have decided to leave ALEC, but some are still members. But Walmart has left ALEC, although I believe there's some Walmart, the corporation, has left. But I think there are some individuals who still are members, individual Walmart family members who are members. But yeah, they hand out legislation, and what it means is that the legislator doesn't have to do the work. Somebody hands them the legislation, and they can introduce it into the Congress and get it passed. And usually these pieces of legislation are not beneficial to the average person. And as I said, the 1994 crime bill was Governor Ridge put that through Pennsylvania, and I think there were something like 33 different crime bills in 1994 passed in Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
We had a question about the DA and Sapala consistently asking for the death penalty with some individuals, and why would he do that when we haven't had an execution for so long? Why would he just continue to do that?
Yeah, well, a number of prosecutors continue to seek the death penalty, even though we have a moratorium here in Pennsylvania. Yeah, and it's interesting. There was a white doctor who um, who killed his wife. I think he poisoned her with cyanide over a period of time.
Yes, yes.
But he didn't seek the death penalty in that case, even though there was clear intent and, you know, but he seeks the death penalty in cases involving African Americans, usually. So, yeah, there seems to be a racial component to his prosecutions.
Yeah, yeah, it was asked, I think part of the question is what can we do? Well, one of the things is whoever the DA is, now he's up for re-election. I don't know if he'll be re-elected or not. But some of us over the years have met with him and asked him not to ask for the death penalty, but he doesn't listen to that. Um, People can continue to advocate on that level, on the lower levels, or specific prosecutors. They're saying they're seeking the death penalty to advocate that they don't do that. Is one way of doing that as well. Um, just so that people know that Governor Shapiro is now in favor of eliminating the death penalty in the Commonwealth. So we have to have his back, and we need to keep advocating for that. So
Right.
there's a possibility that we can just get rid of it altogether in PA.
Did Reed Ryan, did you want to make a comment?
Hey, we've certainly gone through a lot of turmoil over the last several years at the county jail, and we're certainly in the middle of a new warden hunt right now. And the election will have a lot to do with that. Now, Barbara has been down there. How many? 86 years, Barbara, been working at the jail?
Yeah. Well,
but you two, you and our speaker, you've had a lot of focus on the county jail at all?
I have not. No, I've been working with the state mostly.
I can help folks. One of the questions was, how can we support the people in the Allegheny County Jail? One thing is to be an advocate. Orlando Harper is no longer the warden. The process is we now have a temporary warden that was recommended by the state to the county, but they'll be seeking a permanent warden, and they'll be placed in the position probably within a year or two. Sometimes it takes a long process. But whoever is running for county executive, it's not too early to begin advocating about the qualities that a warden should have, because those qualities did not exist at all for a long time. Orlando Harper was in for 10 years, and he just didn't do right by our friends in the jail. There is the Foundation of Hope. You can support the Foundation of Hope. It is a program which supports the folks that are in the jail while they're in the jail, and then when they're released, they're looking for people who sponsor them, to mentor them. It's important that that people get a chance to have a second chance. And very often, unfortunately, that people lose their jobs, they lose their housing, they lose their insurance. Everything is gone, even after they've been in, sometimes only for maybe 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, and they're for non-violent crimes. So one of the things that's really important to support to our folks in the jail is also to advocate for transformation of the criminal justice system. I've shared multiple times that I worked under, my first warden that I worked under, Warden Rustin, had a concept, and I was on his committee to look at. He said 3/4 of the people in his jail do not belong in the jail. We should not be jailing people that are addicted. We should not be jailing mentally ill. We should not be jailing prostitutes. We shouldn't be jailing homeless. So we should be using our tax dollars in order to place these people in rehabilitative situations rather than housing them in jail. And it doesn't help them because once they get out, they have nothing. And so if you have opportunities, if you get to know somebody and to advocate that they get a job, that help them find housing. Part of the HOPE program is for parishes or churches to have places in which the ex-incarcerated could come together and meet with one another to support one another. And so that might be a way of, again, a response from people to do that. I would invite you if you to go to the jail oversight board meetings, even if you don't speak at the board meetings, if you help us fill the room. The jail oversight board is in charge of making sure that the civil rights of the incarcerated are met, and that what has to be transformed is transformed. So that would be very important as well. So those are some of the things that need to be done. Just simply, the one other thing is we're trying to circulate, and we'll try to get that out to everybody, is that medical license are threatened because under the administration, they very often have asked those of us with our license to do things that are illegal. And an example of something that's illegal is pre-pouring medications for somebody else to pass them. That's illegal. You can lose your license over that. So we're asking the legislators to do an investigation and to try to curb that practice in all the facilities in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So you can begin now by speaking with your representatives of the state and let them know that add that to their list of what they need to do. That would be helpful. The chaplain's office, you can become a volunteer, like Jim has become a volunteer. If you feel called to that, you could be a chaplain, or you could come in and help tutor, or if you want to do some creative programming, art or music or yoga or sports or whatever. It's important that they have a life beyond just sitting around and doing nothing. And you could maybe go in and help them with life skills and things like that. If you're a counselor, if you have a counseling background, you can go in and help counsel. All these things, go in and just help them meditate or pray. So there's so many things that you can do, and we can connect you. Just let us know, and we can help connect you to all of that. I hope that's helpful.
Sister Barbara, the other thing is bail reform is so important because sometimes people who are in jail haven't been convicted of anything. They just can't afford to get out. They can't come up with the bail money, and so they sit there for a year. And then often their case is either dropped or they're not convicted. That's devastating.
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing, before I was worked as a nurse, I was also part of the HOPE program, partially for my first part of going into the jail full time. But before that, I worked for Sister Ligori, and we had a program, Incarceration to Independence. And I went in and I counseled the women and I prepared them for release, and followed them out in the community. So those are the types of things, as well as you have to understand the intersectionality of issues too. We have to address the housing issue. We have to address the employment, the unemployment issue. I had a client way back when I was coordinator of that program. She was released. She had a nonviolent crime, was charged with a nonviolent crime. She was released. I helped her with a resume, and she went for an interview at bed and breakfast in Oakland. It was a housekeeping position, and they hired her on the spot, But then the next day she got a phone call and said, "I'm sorry, we don't want you because you have a record." Well, that's the problem. You can't, I mean, it is punishing them over and over. Yes, they have a record, but you have to give them a chance to overcome the record. And if you don't do that, so one of the things is sometimes people can't even get a job at McDonald's. McDonald's will refuse them. And if you haven't had a violent crime, you have to have a chance to get, to sustain yourself and so forth and so on. So even, talking to, there are some labor unions have been actively involved in training former inmates. And so, you could contact the labor unions and encourage all of them. The carpenters union has been doing that. They all need to do that, so there's a lot of things of just asking people to step up to the plate and advocate for people to have, a chance.
We had a question on perspective on local juvenile detention center. Why haven't we prepared an alternative rehabilitation program for juveniles? In the 5 years since it's been closed, juveniles are continuing to kill juveniles, lacking such a rehab program. What is the alternative for our area other than reopening the juvenile facility?
I'm personally in favor of reopening Schumann Center with the right leadership. I think because what happened during the 5 years is that, from what I understand, juveniles were sent all over the place, and families, it was a very burdensome for families to try to keep up with them because they were, sent all over the place. And so I think it's important to have a central facility here in Pittsburgh where juveniles can be sent, and so that their families can keep up with them.
My personal opinion, I'm not opposed to having a center, but I am opposed to privatizing it.
Oh, yeah.
It's complete disaster. I
Yeah.
worked under Corizon at the Allegheny County Jail. It went from not so bad to worse to very worse.
Yeah.
You should never privatize because the emphasis once again is punishment. It's not about rehabilitation. And so we need to have resources in which, we have to educate these youth and to help them work through their issues. Some of them have been abused, and that has left them to be violent. All these things that we just have to do that. So I would ask all of you. The county council right now is in the process of suing Rich Fitzgerald. They do not want Schumann to open under those circumstances. I would back them up and ask that our county resources be used for a facility that actually supports the youth and not just embeds them in punishment.
Right. I agree. I think Corizon, for example, is a private corporation, and they have a profit motive. So the less service they give, the more profit they have. So yeah, I agree. It should not be privatized, whatever happens.
There was a question about whether the Bukit Bail Fund is still operating or any other ways to support that. Casa San Jose has a Fondo Solidario.
I don't know about the bail, whether that's still operating or not.
Okay. There was also a question about, there are some programs, church programs, through the church to adopt prisoners and help them upon release. Do you know anything about those or any other post-release programs to try to reduce recidivism, etc.?
I know there's new organization that just started in September. It's called Impact something. I'm not sure. It's run by Jeff Williams, and I think that he is going to be providing that kind of service, and also the Foundation of Hope that Sister Barbara mentioned. They're also very instrumental in helping people who are newly released.
Great. I don't see any further questions there. Any other questions from the floor?
There's one from Carrie Poole. Would you please be willing to speak to the role that local county district attorneys play in mass incarceration? For example, pressing charges for non-violent crimes like marijuana possessions, piling on charges, for example, aggregated assault instead of simple assault, forcing guilty pleas, so forth.
Yeah, 97%, something like 97% of charges are resolved through guilty pleas, and it really takes away, the Constitution says we have a right to a trial by jury, but in fact, prosecutors press people to plead guilty, even when they're not guilty. They'll be asked. They'll say, "Well, we'll give you, if you plead guilty, you can have 10 years. If you don't, if you go to trial, you could be facing 25 to 30 years." I talked to the mother of a young man who didn't sell drugs. He didn't buy drugs. He didn't take drugs. He had a telephone conversation about drugs, and he initially pleaded guilty. He was pressured into pleading guilty, and then he thought about it, and he said, "No, I'm not going to do that." He wanted to withdraw his plea, and the judge threatened him with 25 years in prison for having a conversation about drugs. So yeah, the prosecutors have tremendous power and discretion as to who to charge, often, and what to charge. Often, Black victims are not charged or don't receive the same sentences as or same charges as white. If you kill a white person, you're likely to get the death penalty. If you kill a Black person, you won't. And prosecutors just have so much discretion as to who to charge. And really, there are certain so prosecutors have tremendous discretion, and actually, the death penalty is used by a lot of prosecutors as a stepping stone to higher political office. Governor Rendell started out as the prosecutor in Philadelphia and made it to governor. Ronald Castile made it to the chief, started in the Philadelphia DA's office and ended up as the Chief Justice of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So, it's a very politicized profession, unfortunately.
We had a question about why there's a 1-year delay in coming to trial. Why does it take a year to come to trial?
Well, I think it's just the backlog of cases. I mean, they're prosecuting so many people that it takes a while for your case to come up in the rotation. And there are procedures that have to be gone through, pretrial motions and so forth. And they take time. I just had a hearing a few weeks ago, and it's going to be, I probably won't get a decision until March, because we have a briefing schedule. We have to file briefs, counter briefs, and then the judge has to make a decision. So, the wheels of justice grind very slowly.
Okay.
My sense is, at the jail, a lot of the of the problems come from not just jail policy, but the lack of resources and the sense that these are people that are criminals and who needs to bother with them, which permeates society and which controls budgets. And the question I was looking for and lost was about the forced mandatory lockdowns that often happen at the Allegheny County Jail on weekends because they're short-staffed, and they're short-staffed because there aren't enough officers, and so they have people locked in the cells. It's a systematic problem as far as I see, well beyond any specific policy. And I guess my question is, you may want to comment on any of that, but the question is, have you seen anything hopeful in turning the public to a more compassionate stance towards what's going on?
Well, I can respond to the Allegheny County Jail. Right now they're down 100 officers. They could use 100 more people, and we're down 94 medical staff. So yes, that and it's economics. So I have very often said that if you intend to incarcerate people and mandate that they're there, they have no access or whatever, you're morally and ethically responsible for their care and their safety. And so that, find the money. You need to find the money. And it's always been a sense of economics. And even when we first started the union, is that we had to make a whole lot of concessions even to become a union, but it was always, we don't have the money. We don't have the money. So that sort of thing. You have to have, there is some movement that that potentially people don't have to live in Allegheny County to work in Allegheny County Jail. So they're working on that. So that might be helpful as far as the officers. The other thing is for the medical staff, you have to be competitive with what nurses are making at AHN and UPMC. If you're working in a transplant or whatever, you're getting a lot of money. You're not going to, work in a jail. But, when I was in the jail, I was actually, I had students from Duquesne University come in and I supervised them. And some of them said from the experience, they thought that maybe they would want to have a career in correctional nursing. Well, that's the other thing. You have to encourage to say that there's an opportunity, but then you have to also pay people so that they will come in.
We had a question about why there's not more dialogue about the expense associated with the death penalty, which is in fact more than life in prison. And an additive to that is the cost of a death penalty trial. We actually just went through this whole thing with the Tree of Life shooter in that case. So that's a real life example. Thoughts on that, Martha?
Yeah, there is a tremendous difference between what it costs to house a regular inmate and what it costs to house someone on death row. It's at least, I think it's at least $30,000 more for death row inmates. And that is also a good argument for ending the death penalty, because it's horribly expensive in addition to all the other problems with it. But in Pennsylvania is surrounded now by states that have given up the death penalty, including New Jersey, New York, West Virginia, Virginia. Because a lot of that is because of the expense. The states, it's just become unsustainable.
There is a comment by one of our participants. All of the research shows that rapidity of sentencing is a far stronger deterrent than severity of sentence. Could you comment on that, Martha, and give some insight?
So a quick sentence versus a bigger sentence later.
It's more of a deterrent. Is that what?
Yeah, than a more severe sentence.
Well, if you have a quicker sentence, you're going to get out. If you have a long sentence, like 25, 30 years, there's no need for a deterrent because you're going to be in prison. I'm not sure I understand. I'm not sure I understand the research.
The only thing I would say to that is that, once again, if people are released and society is not helping them to readjust their situations, they're going to go back to the crime, because, if they're still in poverty, they still don't have employment, they still don't have proper housing, all those things, they're still going to go into their pattern of
Yeah,
crime.
they're going to have. Yeah, the recidivism rate is like 70%, and part of that is because people don't have jobs when they get out, don't have any way to sustain themselves, so they have to return to criminality in order to survive. And it's really a reflection, I think, of our society more so than the person. I mean, why is our society such that African Americans are unemployed? I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine last night, and he was telling me what a rough time he had working for the city of Pittsburgh, and so many of his coworkers were trying to get rid of him, and he had a hard time hanging on to the job. And that's the case for a lot of African Americans, especially Black men, especially Black men who don't have a college degree. Especially if they dropped out of high school, I think the statistic is 78% of Black men who drop out of high school are going to end up in prison.
Huh. Wow.
Yeah.
There was a question, someone commented about how you could be matched as a pen pal with someone who is incarcerated. And then a follow-on question from someone about how to become a pen pal. So do we have any information about how that works? Who's running that program?
Well, I would suggest contacting the Prison Society in Philadelphia. And we currently have someone here in Pittsburgh too now, but they might be able to provide names of people and then there are informal ways too. I know Kathleen Lucas in York, Pennsylvania, has matched people informally, not in a formal way, but she is with the Pennsylvanians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty.
Thank you. Someone has also posted a link in the chat, so people are welcome to take a look at that.
There was a question of why the Catholic Diocese does not advocate against the death penalty when it is in our catechism that we no longer believe in the death penalty. Well, the answer to that and the response from the diocese is they depend on the Catholic Conference of Pennsylvania to be their mouthpiece, and I don't understand why. There's no reason why our diocese. So I would say that that's one thing to write to the Bishop Zubik and his staff to say, you need to speak up. This is our teaching. People in our diocese needs to be aware that we as Catholics should oppose the death penalty. and don't put it off on some other element of our church to do it for us.
We had a
Marsh,
question about our discriminatory hiring practices against those who are or have been incarcerated against the law in Pennsylvania.
What is the question?
Are discriminatory hiring practices against those who are or have been incarcerated against the law in Pennsylvania?
I know that employers are not allowed to ask if you have been convicted or arrested, I should say. They're not supposed to ask that. I know of several people who are out now who are there are certain companies who will hire. I have a friend who is working for FedEx. So I think Foundation of Hope has a list of employers who will employ ex-offenders. And there are other groups as well. I think Divine Intervention Ministries in Pittsburgh has a list of employers who are willing to employ ex-offenders.
Marcia Snowden has a question.
My question is, are there still halfway houses? We used to have them in Pittsburgh where people were given help whenever they left prison. They had a place to go where they got some services and kind of got incorporated back into regular life. Do these places still exist?
I think so, yeah. I think they do. And I'm doing that somewhat. I have someone who's living with me who got out of federal prison a couple of years ago, and I think there are still halfway houses around.
Not only halfway houses, they're three-quarter houses, as they call them, too. We had a very unfortunate incident in McKees Rocks a couple of years ago with the manager. One of these three-quarter houses was selling drugs to the residents. So that was a big thing. You may remember that.
Yeah.
About 2 years ago. But I think there's still a lot of halfway houses, and I guess the quality of them differ from house to house.
Yeah, I think there's one on Hamilton Avenue next to the Homewood Library. That's a halfway house.
There used to be one over on Negley, a big brick house that was a halfway house. Because I had friends who worked with.
That was Michael's Place, and it was by St. Vincent de Paul Society, and it no longer exists. They came on hard times, and it doesn't exist.
How was that funded? You mean, was that funded by St. Vincent de Paul, Jim?
I think so, and maybe some grants.
So that wouldn't be funded by the state or the county as a part of the system then?
No.
Martha, a few moments ago, I did ask a question, and do you see any hope for changing public perceptions, or anybody that's doing anything that gives you a breath of hope?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Innocence Project, has demonstrated that there are a lot of innocent people who are swept up in the criminal justice system, and I think people are much more reluctant now to seek the death penalty in the first place. I think they're up to 180 people who have been exonerated, who are on death row, have been exonerated. So I do see hope, and I don't think it's so much. I don't know if we have enough compassion in the United States, but I think people I think people don't want to see an innocent person executed, and I think that the fact that the Innocence Project is operating has really helped to define that issue and convince people that the death penalty should go. So I am hopeful.
Tell people that there's an opera based on Sister Helen Prejean's memoir, and it's going to be performed in high definition at different theaters all over the country on the 21st of this month, 12:55. And I believe there's a theater in Monroeville. I know there's one in Robinson Town Center, which will show the opera direct from the stage of the Metropolitan. It's certainly worth seeing. It's been playing all over the country and all over the world. It's been very, very popular. So it's certainly worth seeing. Find out where the theater is if you Google Metropolitan Opera in high definition. I tried to write something, but I don't think I said it. Okay, anyway,
You did. It's in the chat as well. Yes, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for sharing that. Well, we're coming toward the end of our evening, and this has just been wonderful. Thank you for all of you attending. If you would please, in the chat, if you would put a word or a takeaway from this time we've had together, that would be wonderful. And then Martha would ask, is there a summation that you would like to give us, a 1-minute summation of this evening?
Well, first of all, I'm just glad to know that there are so many people who are interested in the issue of mass incarceration and the death penalty. That's very encouraging, and I support your efforts to make a difference on these issues. And thank you very much for having me this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been really special. So Joyce, please pray us out.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Martha. Pope Francis prayed, in a special way, I would like to pray for those who are in prison, for our brothers and sisters. They suffer, and we must be near to them with our prayer so that the Lord might console them. So we pray together tonight. Lord, you offer freedom to all people. We pray for those in prison. Break the bonds of fear and isolation that exist. Support with your love prisoners and their families, with friends, prisoner staff, and all who care. Heal those who have been wounded by the actions of others, especially the victims of crime. Help us to forgive one another, to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly together with Christ in his strength and in his spirit, now and every day. As a Christian community, help us to convey a message of solidarity to currently and formerly incarcerated and detained individuals, their loved ones, as well as those who are charged with their care and well-being. Move us to urge political leaders to make all efforts to ensure the health, safety, and spiritual well-being of those inside, including correctional and detention staff. Embolden them to abolish the use of solitary confinement and the death penalty. Even as we work to care for those in need and keep our communities safe, we are grateful to Pope Francis, who reminds us that there are no throwaway lives. As a church, help us to creatively consider ways to be present to people behind bars and to those returning home, to see each other's wounds, meet their pressing needs, and become agents of your restorative work in the world. May your children who are incarcerated never be deprived of hope and always be given the opportunity to redeem themselves. Don't let there be sentences without windows of hope. Let us be inspired by the words of Pope Francis as we pray. Let's think of our incarcerated brothers and sisters, and let's think about the tenderness of God for them, and pray for them so that they may find in that window of hope a way out toward a better life. In Jesus' name, in the name of our Savior and brother who was incarcerated, tortured, and executed, we pray. Amen.
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 Thanks, Joyce.